She had not played the file in 11 years, not because she had forgotten what was in it, but because she had not yet found the room that deserved to hear it. The chip was in her left hand, small, matte black, the edges worn smooth from 11 years of the same grip, thumb over the top, 2 fingers underneath, a habit she had never once thought to name. Outside the chamber doors, the low hum of 31 delegations settling into their seats moved through the corridor walls like a pulse. The session had started 4 minutes ago. Yevith Orens had never been late to a session in 17 years. She stood in the corridor and did not move. Her brother's name was Farron. He had been 34 years old. He had worked infrastructure analysis at Keln Station, and 14 days before the Uravan hegemony's dreadnoughts opened fire without warning, without declaration, and without cause, he had submitted a corrected civilian population registry to the Accord. 3,100 registered inhabitants, not a relay point, not an unmanned navigational marker. 3,100 people who lived there, worked there, ate and slept and argued and made plans. The filing was received, it was logged, it was time-stamped. It was never opened. No warning, no declaration, no one even filed a protest. That was 11 years ago. Yevith had spent the first week after Keln reading her brother's submission log on a terminal in an archive room that smelled of recycled air and warm servers. She had found the timestamp, she had written it down, she had not cried, she had started the archive on Monday. Now she was standing outside the chamber where the Uravan hegemony's arch-convener was, at this exact moment, delivering the procedural address that would permanently close the Keln Station file. Reclassify it, seal it, make it so that no future challenge could reach it. She put the chip back in her pocket, she touched it once through the fabric. She walked through the door. The file was 14 seconds long, she never played it twice. Stay with me because the room she was looking for is coming. 11 years, 2 months, and 4 days earlier, Yevith Orens had sat in a chair that was not designed for sitting for long periods of time, and read her brother's name on a screen for the first time since the strike. Not his name on a memorial, not his name on a casualty list. His name on a submission log, a Farron Orens, infrastructure analysis, Keln Station, submitting analyst, attached to a population registry correction that had been received by the Accord's filing system at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, 14 days before the dreadnoughts arrived. Status received, status unreviewed. She had stared at that word for a long time, unreviewed, not rejected, not lost, not destroyed in the strike. The filing was sitting in the Accord system, intact, time-stamped, waiting. It had been waiting for 8 months by the time she found it. It would wait considerably longer before she was done. Farron's personal effects had come in a standard Accord transfer case, gray polymer, friction-worn corners, the kind of case you send someone's things home in when there is no one to carry them in person. Inside, 2 data pads, a change of clothes folded by someone who did not know how he folded things, a small framed image of the 2 of them at a transit station somewhere she no longer remembered, and 1 standard Accord filing chip with no label. She had held it in her palm for a while, smooth-edged, no markings, she had no way of knowing what was on it. She played it once. The scene does not continue there. Not because nothing happened, but because whatever was in those 14 seconds was Farron's voice, or Farron's work, or something that belonged to the 2 of them and no one else. And the story does not go where it has not been invited. What it will say is this: she played it once, she did not play it again, and she began the archive on Monday. The archive room at the Orvithtown Human Embassy, Subring 2, was not a good room. The ventilation ran slightly too cold, the lighting had 2 settings, bright and less bright, and the server units along the east wall produced a faint, constant hum that was, after the first 3 weeks, simply part of the air. The kettle in the corner was a personal item someone had brought and never reclaimed. It ran out of water at irregular intervals, and had to be manually refilled from a dispenser 4 steps away that took exactly 4 seconds longer than felt reasonable. Yevith refilled it approximately 900 times over 11 years. The first page of the archive was a single entry, Farron Orens, Infrastructure Analysis, Keln Station, submission log reference 7741Ks, filed 14 days pre-strike, status received unreviewed, timestamp preserved, that was all. She had looked at it for a moment, then started the second page. By the end of the first month, the archive was 40 pages. By the end of the first year, it was 600. The Accord's own records were the primary source, not because they were cooperative, but because they were thorough. Every filing the Accord had ever received was logged. Every receipt confirmation existed. The hegemony's filings, the procedural records, the population assessments, all of it was in the system, stamped and dated and marked, in many cases the same way Farron's registry had been marked. Received unreviewed. She read them, she wrote them down, she kept going. 8 months after Keln, there was a knock at the archive room door. Davin Chorus was not technically a delegate. He held a coordination role in the Accord's Observer Liaison Office, a title that had, as far as Yevith could determine, been created specifically to give someone a reason to be on the station without giving them any power. He was medium height, carried a soft-cover folder that had clearly been refilled many times, and had the specific quality of a person who asks questions instead of making statements and does not explain his reasoning unless directly prompted. He stood in the doorway of the archive room, looked at the 40 pages of the archive stacked on the desk beside the cold kettle, and said, "You found it too." She said, "Found what?" He opened the folder. Inside were 9 names, not human names, species designations, accord filing reference numbers beside each one. He set the folder on the desk and said, "I searched the receipt queue, the ones marked received and unreviewed going back 60 years. There are more, but these 9 had something specific in common. Each filing was submitted before an event that benefited the hegemony's territorial or procedural position. Each filing would have, if opened, complicated that outcome." He did not say the hegemony buried them. He did not need to. "Who are they?" she asked. "Species without accord floor standing," he said. "No vote, no voice on the session floor. They filed because filing is what you do when something wrong has happened and you believe the institution will eventually read its own mail." He paused. "It hasn't." She looked at the list. 9 names she did not recognize. 9 species whose filings had been received, logged, and set aside in the same queue where her brother's registry was still sitting. She said, "I want to visit them." He said, "I was going to ask if you wanted to come with me." The Asharivelm were the first. They kept their records in a chamber carved into the outer ring of a station that predated the Accord by 400 years, and the records themselves were organized by resonance pattern. The Asharivelm communicated in subaudible frequencies, and their filing system worked the same way. Walking into the record chamber felt like walking into thicker air. Their senior archivist was old by any standard Yevith could apply, with a pale gold carapace that had deepened to amber at the joints, and a posture that suggested the weight of 9 centuries of institutional memory was, in fact, a physical thing. She had 900 years of certified treaty records. Cross-indexed, stamped, filed with every body that had ever claimed to be the relevant authority. Received, unreviewed. Chorus showed her the timestamp on Farron's registry. He did not explain it. He just placed it on the table next to her oldest unreviewed filing and let the dates sit beside each other. She studied both for a long time. Then she asked through the relay translator, in a voice that registered as a soft pressure change rather than a sound, why humans carried their dead instead of releasing them. Chorus did not know how to answer. It was one of those questions that is entirely reasonable and entirely impossible at the same time. He had never thought about it. He sat with it for a moment. Then he said, "I think it's because we need to know where they are." The archivist was quiet for a while after that. Then she said that she understood, that her people had been carrying their records for 900 years for the same reason. They received her records on a certified relay drive 2 weeks later. The other 8 species came one by one over the following 3 years. Each visit was different. The Davaxereth continuance had no written filing capability accepted by Accord systems, but they had memorized every clause the hegemony had ever authored, everyone, for 400 years. Because their oral archive tradition demanded at least 3 living members hold any important record at all times. They could recite the exact wording of Article 12, subsection 4 from memory. They had been doing so for 180 years, waiting for someone to ask. The Pelathasan communicated through haptic sign language. Their senior delegate, a tall figure with 3-jointed limbs and skin that showed the circulatory system as faint banding beneath the surface, showed Chorus 14 formal protest filings, all logged, all marked received, all unreviewed. Their primary colony world had been reclassified as an uninhabited territorial buffer 60 years prior. The reclassification had been filed as a procedural update. The protest filings had been sent the same day it happened. Received, unreviewed. Chorus brought nothing to offer any of them, no promise of outcomes, no legal argument. He simply showed them the timestamp on Farron's registry and said the same thing each time, in whatever form the translator could carry. They received it. They never opened it. You are not alone in this. 6 more species, 6 more variations on the same story. A planet, a language reclassification. A census entry that would have shown the hegemony's territorial claim was invalid. A treaty that predated the Accord's founding and if entered into the record would have given 3 species a seat at the table they had been excluded from since the beginning. All of it filed, all of it received. None of it opened. Read written down, filed into the archive. The archive passed 1,000 pages in the second year, 3,000 in the fourth. By the time it reached 5,000, Yevith had stopped counting pages and started counting entries. The team came together slowly, the way things that are built to last tend to come together, not through a single decision but through a series of smaller ones, each one only making sense in retrospect. Isin Vale had memorized Article 12 and its 340 years of amendment history at 23 years old. She had done this because she found the clause distribution patterns interesting, which clauses got amended, which never did, and what that pattern revealed about who was writing the amendments and why. She had taken her posting at the Orvithkaln embassy for reasons she described in the interview as professional interest. This was true. It did not cover the complete picture. She arrived on a Thursday. On Friday morning she asked Yevith very precisely whether she was aware that Article 12, subsection 4 had no amendment history. None, not one in 340 years. She found this statistically remarkable. She wanted to know if Yevith had noticed. Yevith had not noticed. She told Vale to write it up. Commander Bren Oseth arrived as tactical liaison and brought with him, listed on the station manifest under Signal Research Equipment, a filing relay unit. The relay unit could, if asked, transmit a document simultaneously to all 31 Accord member delegation terminals via the Accord's own internal relay network, irrevocably per Article 9, subsection 2, upon transmission. The scanner at the docking level read the device as Signal Research Equipment because it was, in fact, also Signal Research Equipment. Both things were true. Oseth did not explain this to Yevith. He simply set it on the table during the first full team meeting and left it there, and she understood. Dr. Yavel Korith had been on the posting for 9 days when she found it. The Accord's unreviewed filing queue, not the full archive, just the receipts, had a search function that was technically available to any credentialed researcher, but that no one used because it had a non-intuitive interface and took 40 seconds to return results. She had been exploring the system out of what she described as curiosity, which was accurate. On day 9, she ran a search filtered by submission date and status. She found Farron's receipt confirmation, the Accord's own stamped acknowledgement of his corrected population registry, time-stamped, marked received, marked unreviewed, sitting in the queue where it had been sitting for 3 years by that point. She printed it, 1 page. She folded it once, then unfolded it immediately and pressed it flat because she had the feeling it was not the kind of document you fold. She put it in a folder. She went to find Yevith. She did not tell Yevith what she had found. She handed her the folder and waited. Yevith opened it, read it once, and then sat with it for a moment that lasted slightly longer than a moment. "You found it in the receipt queue," she said finally. "It was always there," Korith said, "the Accord's own confirmation that they received it, their stamp, their timestamp. They've had it in their own system the whole time." She read it again, then she looked at Korith and said, "How long have you worked here?" 9 days. Something in Yevith's expression changed in a way that was difficult to name, not surprise exactly, and not relief. Something quieter than either. She said, "Don't show that to anyone, not yet." The years after that had a specific texture. Not dramatic, mostly slow, mostly careful, occasionally interrupted by the particular tedium of institutional work. Forms filed in triplicate, relay confirmations that took 3 days to arrive. Sessions attended and noted and recorded in which nothing happened except the gradual accumulation of context. The archive reached 6,000 pages in the 8th year. Yevith stopped eating lunch at her desk and started eating in the embassy corridor instead, which was slightly too cold and had a ventilation hum identical to the archive room but was, crucially, not the archive room. This counted in her accounting of it as a break. The chip moved from her jacket pocket to her left hand and back, a dozen times a day without her ever deciding to do it. It had been doing this for years. It was simply what her hands did when she was thinking. She had never played it again. In the 9th year, Vale knocked on the archive room door at 200 on a Wednesday. Yevith was still at the desk. The kettle was cold. Vale did not sit down. She said, "I need to tell you something about Article 12. Yevith looked up. "I have been reading the clause for 6 years, Vale said. Her sentences, when she was not nervous, were medium length. They were getting longer. The 3 requirements: verified incident archive, named population filing on record, formal declaration by aggrieved delegation in open session. I've been reading them as requirements we might eventually be able to meet, depending on how the archive developed and whether the population filing could be reconstructed from secondary sources." She stopped. "I was wrong about the second condition. I was wrong about it for 6 years. Yevith said, "Tell me." "The named population filing doesn't need to be reconstructed," Vale said. "It's already on record. It's been on record since 14 days before the strike. Farron's registry was received and logged. The Accord has it. It has always had it. All we need is to get it formally re-entered into a session record submitted to the floor, and the second condition is met. We have had all 3 conditions for 11 years. She paused. "We've had everything we needed since the week after Keln. I just didn't understand what the second condition actually required." The archive room was quiet. The server units hummed. Yevith said, "Who wrote that clause?" Vale's answer took 11 seconds. Not because she didn't know, she knew precisely, she had memorized it, but because she was, for a moment, simply sitting with the shape of it. The Uravan hegemony, she said, founding delegation 180 years ago. The morning of the session, Yevith ate in the embassy corridor, a piece of flatbread, a cup of water that had cooled while she was reading the schedule for the fourth time. She adjusted her sleeve. She checked that the chip was in her pocket. She checked that the folder in her left hand, 6,847 pages, condensed to a relay package that Aseth had prepared over the course of 2 weeks, was exactly where she had put it. She had not played the chip. She had not spoken to Farron in 11 years in any way that could be verified. She had simply continued to know what was in the 14 seconds and to carry it and to do the next thing. Chorus met her in the corridor outside the chamber. He was not in session clothes, he had never held floor standing, never attended a session as a delegate, and had no plan to start today. He would stand in the outer corridor with the 9 species and their collective 900 years of unreviewed records, because that was what he had always done, and what he intended to keep doing until it was finished. He said they're all here. She said how many? 9 plus whatever comes through the door in the next 4 minutes. She looked at him. You said 9. I meant 9 confirmed. I have a suspicion about 2 of the mid-tier delegations. He adjusted the folder under his arm. They've been reading the distribution for 3 weeks. One of them requested a copy of the original timeline. That's not nothing. She said it's not enough. He said it doesn't have to be enough. It has to be present. That's the only rule. Then he said, Aneth has never left a session early. Well, she said he hasn't had a reason to. She walked to the end of the corridor. Through the narrow window in the chamber door, she could see the tiered rings of the convocation deliberative, obsidian panels, descending status rings, the hegemony's 14-seat block at the central floor. Human tier, outermost ring, lowest elevation, farthest from the floor. The position designed to communicate, without stating it, that certain delegations were here as a matter of courtesy rather than consequence. Arch-convener Drosvel Aneth stood at the central podium, 2.3 meters. Pale gray-green exoskeletal plating across his shoulders and crown, 4 upper limbs folded in formal posture. His bioluminescent gill slits along the jaw, the only tell his body had, were pale. He was completely calm. He was always completely calm. He had presided over 31 species status proceedings and had never once been answered, and he had no reason to believe today would be different. He had started his address 4 minutes ago. Yevith stood outside the door, chip in her left hand, documents in her right. She put the chip in her pocket. She touched it once. She walked through the door. The chamber smelled of filtered air and the faint chemical residue of 31 different biological atmospheres running through a shared ventilation system. The floor was black. The lighting came from panels set into the tier walls, angled toward the central floor, which meant the outer tiers were always slightly dimmer than the center. Yevith's tier was the dimmest. She took her seat. She did not set anything down. Aneth's address continued. His voice was low, formal, measured, the voice of a person who had given this speech in various forms 31 times and had refined it to the point where every word was load-bearing and none were wasted. The Keln Station navigational reclassification was, per his framing, a routine procedural formality. The station had been classified as an unmanned relay point at the time of the incident. The reclassification simply brought the permanent record into alignment with the operational record. No affected population had been identified. No surviving stakeholder had formally challenged the classification in 11 years. His gill slits stayed pale throughout. Yevith watched them. In the outer corridor, visible through the long observation panels set into the chamber's upper wall, 9 species that held no accord floor standing had taken positions along the corridor rail. No announcement. No coordinated movement. They were simply there, standing, in a corridor that had no chairs because observer-tier delegates were not expected to remain for the full session. Aneth noted their presence. His gill slits did not change. He returned to his prepared remarks. In her seat in the outer tier, Yevith moved the documents from her right hand to her left. She was now holding everything in her left hand. She had been holding everything in her left hand for 11 years. She watched the clock on the chamber wall tick past the 30-minute mark of Aneth's address. Across the chamber, Aseth had not looked at her once since they entered. His right hand rested on the relay unit in its case beside his chair. He was not holding it. He was simply resting his hand there, very casually, in the way of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment for a very long time and has learned to wait without looking like he is waiting. Aneth began his concluding remarks. His gill slits stayed pale. Aseth's hand moved. Aseth's hand moved to the relay unit. He did not look at Yevith. He had not looked at her since they walked into the corridor together 41 minutes ago, and he would not look at her now, because there was nothing to communicate that had not already been planned, rehearsed, and agreed upon in an archive room that smelled of recycled air and warm servers over the course of 11 years. Aneth's concluding remarks continued. The relay unit made no sound when Aseth activated it. Across the chamber, 31 delegation terminals lit up not all at once, but in a sequence so fast it read as simultaneous. One after another, the small indicator lights on each terminal shifted from idle to active. 6,847 pages, transmitted irrevocably through the Accord's own internal relay network. Per Article 9, Subsection 2, authored by the Uravan Hegemony's founding delegation 160 years prior. At 0.4 seconds after Aneth began the final sentence of his prepared remarks. He was still speaking when every terminal in the chamber received the distribution. He finished his sentence. He paused, the natural pause of a person who has reached the end of a prepared text. His gill slits stayed pale. He looked up from his notes. He registered in the specific way of someone who has been doing this for 31 years that something in the chamber had changed without making a sound. He did not know yet what it was. Yeveth did not move. The chip was in her pocket. She had not touched it since she sat down. Her left hand held her documents, the folder, the printed confirmations, the relay receipt that had come back to Asath's unit in the 0.4 seconds since transmission, and she did not set any of it down. One of the Hegemony's legal team members opened the distribution on his terminal. He read the cover page. He read the first entry. He turned and said something very quietly to the delegate beside him. Aneth looked at his legal team. His gill slits stayed pale. He had no reason to be concerned. He had 31 years of unopposed precedent, a 14-seat majority, and a session record that showed no formal challenge had been filed or was pending. Whatever had just been distributed was procedurally irrelevant until someone moved to enter it into evidence, and no observer-tier delegate had floor rights to do that. He was correct about all of this. He did not yet know about Article 12, Subsection 4. Yeveth stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically. She rose from her seat in the outer tier with the specific deliberateness of someone who has stood up and sat down at this table for 17 years and has no intention of doing either one accidentally. She held everything in her left hand. From the outer tier, outermost ring, lowest elevation, farthest from the central floor, a standing human delegate was not technically requesting the floor. Observer tier delegates could stand. They could not speak without floor recognition, which Aneth had no obligation to grant. She reached into her left-hand folder without looking down and removed a single sheet of paper. Not from the 6,847 pages. One page, printed from a standard archive terminal 9 days into Dr. Yavel Korath's posting 3 years after Keln, the Accord's own stamped receipt confirmation for a population registry submitted by Farron Orens, Infrastructure Analysis Keln Station on a Tuesday morning 14 days before the dreadnoughts arrived. Received, time-stamped, unreviewed. The Accord's own confirmation, the Accord's own stamp. The Accord's own record that the filing had always existed, had always been in the system, had been sitting in the queue with the Accord's own acknowledgement attached to it for 11 years. Korath had carried this one page for 8 years in a folder built to carry thousands. She had never shown it to anyone outside the team. She had been waiting for the room. Yeveth submitted it to the floor via the standard standing delegate filing channel, the one observer-tier delegates could use, the one that went directly into the session record without requiring floor recognition. The one the Hegemony had written into Accord procedure 60 years prior to allow smaller delegations a paper trail without giving them a voice. The population registry correction, Farron Orens, submitting analyst Keln Station 14 days before the strike, entered the permanent session record for the first time. His name was in the record now. 2 of the Hegemony's legal team members began drafting a procedural objection. The other 2 had gone very still. One of them had opened the distribution on his terminal and was on page 4. He had stopped moving. Aneth's gill slits stayed pale. Across the chamber, in the mid-tier seating ring, a delegation Yeveth did not recognize. One of the 4 that Chorus had said were reading the distribution before today, slowly closed the cover of the document package on their terminal, then opened it again, and began reading from page 1. The chamber was technically still in session. Aneth was technically still presiding. The agenda item was technically still open. None of these things were about to save him. Isin Vale filed the invocation from her seat 2 tiers below Yeveth's. Article 12, Subsection 4, Dissolution Clause. 3 conditions required: a verified incident archive, a named population filing on record, and a formal declaration by the aggrieved delegation in open session. All 3 conditions met. The archive, 6,847 pages, distributed to all 31 delegations via irrevocable relay 14 minutes prior. The population filing, Farron Orens received time-stamped, now entered into permanent session record. The formal declaration, pending, approximately 30 seconds away. The invocation arrived in Aneth's legal team's terminal simultaneously with arrival in the session clerk's record. Per Accord filing protocol, it could not be intercepted, rerouted, or returned. It could only be answered. One of the two legal team members still drafting the objection stopped drafting. He read the invocation. He read Article 12. He read it again. He built the procedure. He signed the clause. He archived the records. All she had done was read them. Aneth received a relay summary from his legal team. His gill slits stayed pale. He read it. He read it once more. He set it down. In the outer corridor, through the chamber's observation panels, 9 species with no floor standing, no accord vote, and no chairs shifted their positions. Not dramatically, not in a coordinated way, but in the small way of people who have been standing still for a long time and have just been told by the quality of the silence in the room beyond the glass that the thing they came to witness is about to happen. The chamber was quiet in a way that chambers of 31 delegations are not supposed to be quiet. Yeveth stood in the outer tier. She had been standing for 4 seconds since Vale's invocation confirmed received. The clock on the wall read 3 seconds past the 39th minute of Aneth's address. The session was still open. He was still presiding. She adjusted her grip on the documents in her left hand. She had not set anything down since she walked through the door. She did not set anything down now. She spoke one sentence. Not loudly, the chamber's audio system picked up anything above a murmur from any tier, and she had no interest in performing. She spoke in the flat, clear register of someone reading from a prepared text, which is what she was doing because this was the one sentence she had written down, the only thing in 11 years she had not trusted herself to carry in her head. For the record of this session and all subsequent sessions, Farron Orens, infrastructure analyst, Keln Station, submitted a corrected civilian population registry to this body 14 days before the station's destruction. It was received, it was never opened, and his name is in this record now, and it will not be removed. She folded the paper, she put it in her left-hand folder. She did not set the folder down. She turned. She walked toward the corridor exits. Isin Vale followed. She did not look back at the central floor, at Aneth, at the legal team, at the session clock. She simply stood and walked. Her steps were unhurried and precise in the way of someone who has been waiting for this specific walk for 6 years and intends to take each step of it exactly right. In the corridor outside, Davin Chorus, who had stood in that corridor for the entire session, who had never entered the chamber, who had never held floor standing and had never tried to, stopped standing in his position and began walking in the same direction. No signal, no nod. Just the door opening and 2 people walking through it and Chorus already moving. Commander Bren Osath rose from his seat. He picked up the relay unit. He carried nothing he had not carried in. Dr. Yavel Korith closed her folder. Not quickly, not with any kind of gesture. She closed it the way you close something that is finished, with the specific care of a person putting an object away that has served its purpose, that does not need to be held anymore, that can now simply rest. She tucked it under her arm, she stood, she walked. Behind them, in the outer corridor, 9 species with no floor standing, no accord vote, and no chairs, 9 species that had been standing in that corridor with their 900 years of certified records, and their 14 unanswered protests, and their memorized clauses, and their single remaining colony and their unstamped census entries, began walking in the same direction. None of them had been asked. Archconvener Drosvel Aneth's gill slits flushed amber. Not faintly, not in the suppressed flicker that close observers might have caught twice in the last 40 minutes. Fully visibly, the deep amber of an autonomic stress response that his body had never been trained to hide because, in 31 years of presiding, it had never needed to. He did not call the session to close. He could not close it. The dissolution invocation was in the record. The population filing was in the record. The archive was in 31 terminals. Per Article 12, subsection 4, authored by the Uravan Hegemony's founding delegation 180 years ago, signed by every member of that delegation, never amended, never reviewed, sitting in the Accord's permanent clause archive for 180 years waiting for someone to read it carefully enough. The session was now a dissolution proceeding, and dissolution proceedings did not close until the record was complete. The record would take 90 days to process. He filed a procedural objection to a session that had already legally closed. The Accord's automated routing system received the objection. It reviewed the session's status. It noted that the session was a dissolution proceeding and therefore outside standard procedural objection jurisdiction. It routed Aneth's filing to the standard 90-day review queue, a queue authored by the Uravan Hegemony 140 years prior, specifically to delay smaller species challenges by ensuring they moved through a review process that ran at institutional pace rather than emergency pace. The objection would be reviewed in 90 days. In the corridor outside the convocation deliberative, the last of the 9 species rounded the corner at the far end of the hall. The sound of their movement varied, soft, the footsteps and resonance patterns and haptic clicks of 9 different biologies faded. The chamber was empty except for Aneth and his 31-seat delegation, and a session record that would not stop growing. The Remembrance Anteroom was on the Human Embassy's docking level, one floor below the main corridor, accessible through a door that most station residents did not know existed because it was not on any general directory. It had a folding table, 4 chairs, a ventilation duct that produced a sound slightly lower in pitch than the archive room's hum, and a wall where for 11 years a photograph had been pinned at eye level. Farron Orens, age 34. Keln Station Identification Image. He was looking slightly to the left of the camera, the way people do when they have been told to look at the camera and have not quite managed it. He was wearing the standard infrastructure analyst uniform. He looked like himself, which she had always found when she thought about it, to be the most that a photograph could do. Yeveth set her folder on the table. She sat down. She did not take her jacket off. Chorus sat across from her. There was tea. He had made it before the session started, and it had been cooling for 47 minutes. He pushed the cup toward her. She wrapped both hands around it without drinking. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Through the ventilation duct, very faint, the station's standard operational hum, the sound of a place that was continuing to function regardless of what had happened in the chamber above them. The 3 mid-tier delegations that had been reading the distribution during the session submitted independent verification requests before the session day ended. One of them, the one that had closed the distribution cover and then opened it again, attached a note to their request that said simply, "We have reviewed the archive. We believe the record is complete. We are prepared to confirm." Chorus read the note when it came through on his relay unit. He set the unit down on the table without speaking. Yeveth had not moved. The tea was still cooling. She reached into her jacket pocket. She took out the chip, thumb over the top, 2 fingers underneath, the grip she had never consciously named. She held it for a moment. The left edge was smooth from 11 years of exactly this. She set it on the floor of the anteroom, face up, next to the base of the chair where the photograph was. Not on the table. On the floor in the space between the table legs, where the light from the wall panel reached it at a low angle and made the matte surface catch slightly. She did not play it. She looked at the photograph for a while. Farron, age 34, looking slightly left of the camera. She had built 11 years around 14 seconds she already knew by heart, and the room that deserved to hear them had heard them, and his name was in the record now, and it would not be removed. The tea cooled, the ventilation hummed. Chorus did not speak because there was nothing to say that the record had not already said. The chip lay on the floor face up, next to the photograph of her brother.